We'd like to begin with the next session, concurrent session 2, accommodation for persons with disabilities and mental illness. So if we could have your attention, please. Our first presenter will be Mr. James Roots, who is the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of the Deaf and the father of 4 children, 2 of whom have disabilities and 1 of whom is gifted. He has an MA in political science and is the author of The Politics of Visual Language, Deafness, Language Choice, and Political Socialization, among many other publications. Mr. Roots, thank you for coming here today and for sharing your insights with us. You're on.
Just clearing some space so I have some room. Thank you. I've been involved with disability advocacy over the last 33 years, but that is not what I'll be speaking to today. Today I'll speak about my family and my real life experience within the education system. I have 2 things I'd like to discuss. 2 of my children, Monica, and this is her sign name, and Peter, and that's his sign name. I'll start off with Monica. She has Down syndrome and is considered to be high functioning. She joined our family when she was 6 months old, and she's just turned 16. She's completed grade 10 this year. Her school experiences within elementary school, which was grade 1 to grade 7. She was in a special needs class placement. And what that looked like was that she was often socialized with her non-disabled peers. There were opportunities for interaction. During math class, library, she had someone working with her one-on-one. Within the classroom setting, the teacher asked that Monica teach sign to her fellow classmates. She was given responsibility within the classroom. For example, she would help out with some of the younger students. It was really great for her self-esteem. She felt that she was the queen, that she was a leader, and she was doing very well. Grade 8 and 9 is in what we have locally as middle school. That was then a segregated placement. Only 1 or 2 classes were in a mainstream setting with inclusion with her peers, and at that time she had an educational assistant working with her. Most of the time, she was placed and matched with volunteers who were buddies for her, but in most cases, they were ill-suited, sometimes with boys, her peers as boys. And there was a lot of bullying outside of the classroom. My wife and I repeatedly asked that Monica be given responsibilities. She needs them, and she really enjoys them. Our requests were dismissed. So this past year, in grade 10, her placement was completely segregated. There was no socialization with any of her non-disabled peers. Within her group of, within her class placement, there was aged 15 to 21. And the intellectual age of the children ranged between age 2 and age 8. More on average on the upper end of that range. There were multiple different types of disability, all within the same classroom, some to do with intellect or developmental delays. Nothing was taught in that classroom. They didn't even pretend to teach. As an example, I went to attend a normal day of class. The first 2 hours of the morning, the students were watching videos. And I have to say they were an elementary level. For example, Blue's Clues. In the afternoon, that same day, there was 2 hours of playing video games. And again, even the video games were at a very elementary level. They would participate in work experience once a week. What that looked like for Monica was visiting a retirement home and folding towels. Again and again and again for a full hour, and that was considered work experience. The life skills class had a sink. They would fill the sink with water and soap, and she was expected to practice washing dishes. There was also a food skills class. The expectations of her were to butter bread. Monica, she's so famous within the family. Her monster sandwiches that she builds are amazing. She's got several slices of bread, usually 4. She butters them all up. She puts mustard only on the outer 2 layers. And then there's relish that goes on next. Tomato slices carefully placed. Pickles laid across each slice. There's 2 kinds of cheese. She loves pepper, so she'll grind on each slice some pepper. Onions, lettuce, the list goes on, and it becomes a monster sandwich, the kind that you have to struggle to eat and get in your mouth. But at school, the expectation was to butter bread. To me, I don't consider that inclusion. That's not inclusive, and it's not education. It's more typical of babysitting. Peter, my son, is profoundly deaf. He has a learning disability and physical disability and has some symptoms of FASD. He's of the Ojibwe Nation near Sioux Lookout. It's northwestern Ontario. He lived near a reserve there where there were not many services available to him. He had serious language gaps. ASL, English, literacy, nothing was taught from his home community. He joined our family at age 4.5. And he just turned 15, and he's at school at a grade 9 level. And just like Monica, I will outline Peter's learning experience in 3 different stages. So kindergarten to grade 5, there was one hearing impaired class throughout all of Ottawa. Including the outlying regions of Ottawa. There was just the one class that was designated as such. And the school refused to provide ASL tutoring. They refused to use ASL as a language of instruction in the classroom. They had to use signed English within the classroom. But I have to say that the use of signed English assumes that you already have a foundation with the English language, and Peter came with none. It was not a learning environment for him. After 5 years, we put him in a local school for grade 6, an inclusion type setting. And we were forced to sue the school board. They would not provide tutors or certified interpreters. We won our lawsuit. However, still, the school board claimed undue hardship and was not able to provide tutoring. Instead of an interpreter, they provided an EA, an educational assistant with signing skills, to be the equivalent. And that service was only provided during school instruction hours. There was no support for him during breaks before or after school. After that experience, we decided to send him to Belleville School for the Deaf. And you might be wondering why it took us 7 years to get him there. But we really were focusing on Peter's bonding within the family. After 7 years, we felt that there was an attachment, and so he was better prepared to spend some time at Belleville. The first year he was there, he won 7 awards at the school, including one for Best Role Model and Most Improved. He's a very popular kid. His social experience is night and day different from when he was in an inclusive setting. His ASL skills have improved. He is now provided with tutoring and an ASL language class, as well as he lives in residence, which means he's got 24/7 exposure to the language. But with a 12-year language learning delay, he'll never be able to fully catch up and achieve true fluency in the language. Unfortunately, at Belleville, the curriculum is quite weak. The goals are not terribly clear, and of his 6 courses that he's currently taking, one is gym, another is social studies, numeracy, and to clarify, it's not a regular mathematics class, it's numeracy. And his 3 other courses are all language classes. Within life skills, his classes, he learns how to manage $5 a week. His social skill goals are to learn how to behave in non-deaf environments, for example, out at the movies or at a restaurant, which is actually a very important skill and is important for students within the deaf community to learn, so I have no complaints about that. But he's had a late start with all of his instruction. My overall impression with both of my kids and their education is that they do have some limitations, but I would say that the school has defined these children by their limitations. Monica's teacher, this is a direct quote, has said, "They have reached their plateau," meaning there's no further to go from here. And something that's problematic is that the teacher is usually accommodating the child who is doing not as well. So they're teaching towards the least common denominator, the lowest common denominator within the classroom. They're matching the bottom student, if you will. But with intellectual disabilities, I've seen if you do not provide challenge for the students, their abilities will deteriorate over time. 5 years ago, Monica was reading the books like Nancy Drew, which is at about a grade 5 level. And now she's reading grade 1 material. Her skills have deteriorated, and it makes me question, what's the point of education after all? As my kids are becoming older, time spent on instruction and education is decreasing. I think the system quits on them as students. They've reached their plateau, they've maxed out their capability. The school board will not refund or will not fund the school board is refusing to fund the required level of support and services that are needed. They refuse to provide after-hours support. So that leaves me with the question, where's inclusion? Each year, the amount of time that my child spends with their peers is reduced. And each year, the amount of time with their peers outside of the classroom is also in turn reduced. And I don't want to ever complain about something without leaving you with some ideas and some solutions. So I have 6 here to suggest. The first would be pay for it. EAs, interpreters, support workers, they're not frills. Not everything comes free. If the government really wants to see these kids be successful, it's important they pay now. Otherwise, they're going to end up being paying in the long run with other disability supports, EI, and other social services that are out there. The second would be take control of the funding. I don't know how it works in other provinces, but in Ontario, the local school board decides how the funding is spent for special education support services. The problem with that is there's personal bias involved in those decisions. For example, in Ontario, there are more than 50 local school boards. One organization sits on more than 40 of those boards, and that particular organization refuses to fund sign language and interpreters or ASL tutors, and they do not support any sign language use within the classroom. The provincial government needs to fund directly to the student. Currently, pardon the interpreter, who needs to decide the support services would be the student, the teacher, the parents, or neutral service organizations, not doctors, not an organization that provides only one option, and not the school board. It needs to change. My third recommendation would be regarding IEPs, which may be different in your respective provinces, but individualized education plans, I hope you're familiar with them. They're a good idea in theory, but I believe they're implemented incorrectly. The IEP is supposed to identify the maximum potential for each individual student, and then how to achieve those goals and that potential. But somehow it seems that in reality, they identify the lowest goals possible. I think individualized education should mean exactly that it's individualized. And it doesn't assume that all children with intellectual disabilities are the same and should be treated as such. My fourth suggestion would be the common phrase used these days, we have an app for that. Use technology. That can bring the playing field to a level, it can level the playing field for students with disabilities. Both of my children have difficulty with math. Adding they can do, but subtracting, multiplying, it just doesn't quite, their brains aren't wired to be able to do subtraction. So why not have a device with an app, and of course, train them how to use the specific app to help subtract, to do the work for them. Peter is really wanting to become a carpenter. And there's a lot of measurements and specifications that need to be followed, and he's not able to do that on his own. But if he has an app, and he knows the number, he can cut it to the specification. He doesn't necessarily have to learn how to do it himself. He can use the technology to help level that playing field. My fifth suggestion would be, if you want to see inclusion be successful, use peers. I think our kids should be placed within a regular classroom matched by their chronological age, not their intellectual age. A 17-year-old being in the same classroom placement as a 7-year-old is embarrassing. They should be placed with their chronological peers. And they should be provided the same assignments on the same topic, but with adaptations to match the ability of the student, and to also provide them with challenge. And I know that we can find a way that the child can be successful within the assignment. So just do it, just make it happen. And I think within the context of appropriate support services in place, I think it's doable. My final suggestion, number 6, would be to recognize and accept that for some students with disabilities, inclusive education is not the best option. Some of Monica's friends, for example, are not maybe at the same level as some of the other students. There should be other options in place that would better accommodate. With deaf children, sometimes the best option is to be at a school for the deaf. Instead of focusing on communication, and I think it's difficult maybe to grasp the pressure that these children feel along the lines of communication. Once that's removed, they can focus on their education instead of every effort going into communication. And I can say my own personal experience growing up and continuing in life, that pressure does not stop or change. But when you're in an environment where language is not an issue and communication can happen freely, the pressure is off, like in the school for the deaf. I guess I'm over time. Pardon me. I'll close. Thank you very much.